Hello. Yes, a very good morning to everyone, and I will invite all the panelists to the dais. So again, a very good morning, everyone. My name is Animesh Kumar. I'm the head of UNDRR office in Bonn, and very pleased to welcome everyone to this very high-level panel discussion on global stocktake and the midterm review of the Sendai framework. So let me introduce the moderator of the day, Ms. Laurie Hibo-Girardet. She's the head of the Risk Knowledge Branch in Geneva, headquarters of UNDRR. So Laurie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today with a very distinguished panel. I'd like to just introduce the panel first and then say a few words, and then we will kick off straight away. So I would like to begin by introducing Ms. Mami Mizutori, who is the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. And I'm very pleased as well to introduce Ms. Lakshmi Dewanti, who is the Director General for Climate Change in Indonesia. In addition, today we also have Mr. German Velasquez, who is the Director of the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation for the Green Climate Fund, and Ms. Kristen Hagen, who's the Senior Humanitarian Policy Officer at the IFRC, as well as Mr. Farhan Akhtar, the Chief Scientist for Climate Change in the U.S. Department of State. And finally, Sophie Rigg, who's the board member of GNDR. So as you can see, a really diverse group who will be looking at today's issues from different angles and offering insights which I hope will really inform the discussions over the next several days. So today's event is to look at the global stocktake, but also in the context of the midterm review of the Sendai framework, which just took place 2 weeks ago in New York. The midterm review of the Sendai framework was an opportunity to see where are we in terms of the global blueprint for reducing and managing disaster risks. And it probably comes as no surprise that the results are that, of course, good progress has been made, but we really must accelerate action now, especially in the face of growing climate risks. So today's session objectives really provides us with an opportunity to discuss how we will scale up disaster risk reduction alongside and with climate action, building on the findings and recommendations of the midterm review of the Sendai framework, but really looking at what does coherence and integration mean between climate action and DRR, and how can a more coherent policy landscape provide the basis for accelerated implementation, whether we're talking about early warnings for all or nature-based solutions, infrastructure resilience. Both DRR and climate change areas of work really belong together, so we can bring together disparate and sometimes fragmented parties working on this. We also would like to share good practices in integrated DRR and climate change adaptation planning. And of course, at the same time and always, we really make a call for stronger local climate action so that we have a more bottoms-up approach to resilience building. We note that the concurrent stocktaking of the midterm review of the Sendai framework and the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement really does offer us a unique opportunity to maximize our efforts collectively. And a lot of the work that we're carrying out in UNDRR is the promotion of what we call comprehensive risk management. And that means that we look at climate and disaster risk in a much more holistic way. It's no longer the purview of one or two ministries, but it's something that really needs to be embedded across all sectors and all scales. And today's panel will help point to ways in which we can do this. So with no further ado, I would like to go ahead and begin with some words of welcome from Paul de Sanker, who is the Manager of Response and Loss and Damage of the UNFCCC. He will be speaking on behalf of Mr. Simon Stiell, who unfortunately is unable to be here this morning. The floor is yours, please. Paul.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'll be speaking on behalf of Mr. Simon Stiell, our Executive Secretary. Dear colleagues and friends, while we have enjoyed some nice summer days in Bonn since the start of the sessions, the news from across the Atlantic is a stark reminder of the future we face if we do not accelerate the pace and scale of climate action. Several million acres of forest on fire in Canada, blanketing large parts of North America with smoke. Since they were adopted in 2015, the synergies between the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement have been evident. We all work for a common purpose and with the same goal in mind, which is to save lives, property, and communities for calamitous incidents. This is becoming all the more urgent as the disastrous effects of a warming planet is already wreaking havoc on hundreds of millions of people around the globe through increasing forest fires, stronger and more frequent violent storms, floods, and droughts, and so on. So we must ramp up ambition to limit the warming that is the cause of these increasing disasters. If we do not, we will have to live with an ever-increasing number of disasters. We will also have to manage the dramatically growing cost of simply replacing destroyed value instead of building better and resilient societies. To enhance the implementation of adaptation action, it is crucial to set a meaningful global goal on adaptation established under the Paris Agreement. We hope that the two-year work program on the GGA, set to conclude at COP28 in Dubai, will be an ambitious, measurable goal that is aligned with the global stocktake. Colleagues, we have a common agenda in building resilience through planned adaptation. We need to see this as two sides of the same coin and break down the silos between climate adaptation and disaster preparedness. We should ensure that national and local governments see the importance of integrating disaster and climate-related strategies, plans, and financing. The good news is that we can do this through the tools we already have. For example, by improving climate risk-informed planning across sectors. National adaptation plans are important vehicles for that. However, to date, only 45 countries have submitted a NAP. The UNFCCC has been supporting countries to develop and submit NAPs through the Least Developed Countries Expert Group and initiatives such as the UN-wide technical backstopping initiative called UN for NAPs, that UNDRR and others in the disaster risk reduction community are an indispensable part of. Requests for technical assistance through the LEG and small island developing states received through UN for NAPs echo many of the findings of the Sendai Midterm review. This includes a lack of high-quality climate data, the need to strengthen capacities at the national level, the lack of access to finance to formulate and implement relevant plans. The third front of the climate action is on loss and damage. For the loss of life or damage to infrastructure, ecosystems, or cultural heritage that cannot be avoided through planned adaptation measures, we must have a strong response. The decision at COP27 and COP27 and CMA4 to establish the new funding arrangements and the fund for assisting particularly vulnerable countries for loss and damage created the essential part of the climate action agenda alongside mitigation and adaptation. This is a crucial step forward in addressing the needs of vulnerable countries that are already experiencing the devastating impacts of climate change. The establishment of this fund and funding arrangements will enable countries to also access support for adaptation and resilience building measures. In addition, the Santiago Network will support in catalyzing technical assistance on loss and damage, which brings me to the global stocktake. The third and final technical dialogue under the first global stocktake is taking place as we speak. The response to the GST is our crucial chance to do a course correction and increase our ambitions. It also is an opportunity to bring in the insights from the midterm review to inform our understanding of progress under the Paris Agreement. Today's dialogue will be an important part of that process. I wish you the best for your discussions today and for the continuous work you're doing to align the DRR and climate agendas to strengthen this. We need to harness this solid and growing foundation of synergistic goals, processes, and strengths to achieve our common goals and tackle our common challenges to 2030 and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for setting the stage and really highlighting the linkages between the midterm review of the Sendai framework and the global stocktake, and also pointing out to the other issues which are dominating the climate agenda today. With this, I would now like to invite Ms. Mami Mizutori, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, to deliver the keynote remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for coming on a Monday morning, not too early, but fairly early in the morning to this event. I understand from my colleagues that this is the only side event during this this week that is relating disaster risk reduction with climate action, which is a very important theme, as we all know. So, Laurie, Paul, thank you very much. You mentioned a lot about how to integrate the midterm review findings of the Sendai framework with what is happening today here in September in global stocktaking and also at COP28. And this is exactly what we think can happen this year. The midterm review of the Sendai framework, the findings are very much related to what is happening around climate, because as we all know, 90% of all disasters are related to climate. And it's not only about this, it's about how can we connect all the global agenda together. The Sendai framework, the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, the biodiversity framework, and this is what we need to do better, because we find that, as today we will discuss, there are too many silos at the global level, at the regional level, and again at the national level. So what we are trying to promote here today, the synergizing of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, is let's break down these silos. But first we do need to break down our silos in our thinking, in our concepts, because sometimes, or many times, we talk about the disaster risk reduction community and the climate adaptation community as if we are talking about two different things, and we are not. We are facing the same issue. The failure to cut down on disaster risk, the failure to mitigate climate emergency, the result is losses and damages, as we know. And here, we are facing the same thing, and we need to first acknowledge this. So we have been proposing and working to implement what is called the comprehensive risk approach. Comprehensive risk management approach is an approach that brings together disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. Paul mentioned that only 40-something countries have a NAP. As for disaster risk reduction, there are now close to 130 countries which have disaster risk reduction strategies. But what happens on the ground many times is that one is led by a ministry, the other is led by another agency, and they actually don't talk to each other. And the result is, I wouldn't say waste, but not the efficient use of limited finances, of human resources, and the impact always gets reduced. So we would like to see more synergy between the disaster risk reduction strategies and the NAPs, and in many cases, even why don't we make just one strategy or one NAP, one strategy or plan that brings together DRR and adaptation in the same paper, in the same place. This is what we're trying to do. And in order to do this, we are giving very much tailored support to the most vulnerable at-risk countries so that they can bring together this synergy. Another way that we are trying to create this synergy is through co-leading what is called the UN Secretary General's Early Warning for All initiative. This initiative, which you may have heard, is an initiative to cover the whole planet by 2027 with effective end-to-end inclusive early warning system. And as you all know, early warning system is both a DRR measure and a climate adaptation measure. So if we can succeed in doing this, it's ambitious, but if we can succeed in doing this, then we are again bringing together DRR and climate adaptation. And this executive plan for this initiative was launched at the last COP. At the next COP 28, we will discuss further about this, look at what has been implemented, and we will also launch a joint research paper on the global status of early warning system at that time. Another thing that we are doing is that we have this tool which is called Desinventar, which helps countries to account for their losses and damages. Now, currently, we are revamping this very important tool so that they can look at losses and damages in a more disaggregated way. And this prototype will also be launched at the next COP. We believe that this will contribute very much to the ongoing discussion about the Loss and Damage Fund. We are also fully committed to the operationalization of the Santiago network, and if we, UNDRR, if we can have a role in that, we are happy to do that. But the important thing is that the network is operationalized. Also, in terms of the global goal on adaptation, which is going to be one of the important themes at this next COP, the targets, metrics, and data of the Sendai framework are now being considered for monitoring the process towards the achievement of the global goal on adaptation. And I'm also very pleased to mention that today we are launching a leadership program on synergizing disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Why? Because we have heard from many of our partners that there is a need for better guidance and tools to enhance decision-making around disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation. This new leadership program has been developed in partnership with the UN System Staff College and has been funded by the government of Germany. And this is a very interactive program which is designed for, of course, government leaders and decision makers at all levels, but participants from the non-governmental sector stakeholders can also take part, access to scenarios and use cases and resources to enhance climate resilience. So these are some of the things that we are trying to synergize these two things. But the important thing is that in order to scale up this synergy, everybody has to come together. And this is why I would like to truly call on the parties and the co-facilitators to please look into the midterm review political declaration of the Sendai framework, and please, all together, let's achieve this synergy as quickly as possible, because as Paul was saying, we are experiencing a very nice warm day here in Germany, but it won't be very nice. I just came from Cambridge, UK, where my husband is this weekend. And Sunday was going to be a very hot day. They were speculating whether for the first time in the UK, the temperature might reach 40 degrees, which is something unprecedented in the UK. And as you know, in many homes in the UK, there is no such thing as an AC. So starting from that, it's a big tragedy for everybody. But, it's even more than that for many vulnerable countries at risk of their existence. So I'd like to close by appreciating our collaboration and partnership with the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, REAP, and Global Network for Disaster Reduction, GNDR, and all our other partners, which has made this event possible. And I'll just end by saying that we truly believe that comprehensive risk management is essential to achieve zero climate disasters. global stocktake process is a chance to truly build a resilient future for all. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Mami, and thank you very much for launching the leadership program on synergizing disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, because we know to change the mindsets and change the attitudes, leadership is so important. So if any would like to take a look at this guidance and tools, we're happy to share this with you. So thank you again. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Lakshmi Dewanti, who's the Director General for Climate Change from Indonesia, but Indonesia also served as co-chair of the midterm review of the Sendai framework. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderators, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. A very good morning. May peace upon every of us. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, participants. Indeed, it is a pleasure for me to take part in this discussion of these important topics and to share with you the key messages for of the political declarations of midterm review of Sendai framework adopted in New York on 19th of May. Excellencies, dear colleagues, as mandated by the GA Resolution 75/216, 76/204, and 77/164, midterm review on the Sendai framework implementation was held to assess progress, identify good practices, gaps, and challenges, as well as to accelerate the achievement of Sendai framework. In implementing the mandate, the UNDRR has successfully delivered a comprehensive report developed from a thorough review of the Sendai framework implementation by member states. From this report, we also learned that we are not on track in achieving the target we set back in 2015. Some of the challenges identified by the report includes the continuing global systemic risks, which as accelerating climate change impact and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, inadequate and siloed risk governance, lack of financing on preventive measures and response favor over prevention, lack of policy and regulatory incentive for DRR in private sectors, externalizing of risk in investment and finance, short-termism in capitals, markets, and policies risk assessment, and lack of access to risk data and risk knowledge. There was an urgent need to enhance efforts, increase ambitious, and stronger political will to address the gaps and challenges we face. With current pace, it is believed that we might not achieve the target set by Sendai framework by 2030. On that regard, Ambassador Nasir of Indonesia and Ambassador Vivit of Australia were appointed by the presidents of the GA to co-facilitate the development of a concise, action-oriented, easy-to-digest, and conceptual political declarations. The political declaration was structured around the 4 priorities of Sendai framework, in which, under each priority, series of action were agreed to accelerate the implementation of Sendai. Under the first priority on understanding disaster risk, it was agreed to enhancing the capacity, finance, and technology development, improve data collection and analysis, integrating local traditional knowledge with scientific approaches to risk assessment, and enhancing the promotion of disaster prevention and resilience culture. The second priority, strengthening governance to manage disaster risk, calls were made for an enhanced all states institutions coordinations, mainstreaming, and localizations of DRR in all aspects of sustainable development, including promote nature-based solution and ecosystem-based approaches to increase biodiversity resilience, support sustainable livelihood, and build community resilience. Furthermore, the third priority, investing on DRR resilience, highlights the needs for more funding and investment for DRR through increased public budget allocations, working with private sectors and international financial institutions. It was also underlined that international financial institution reform also to include integrations of DRR in lending, debt support, financing streams, and grants. Finally, the fourth priority on preparedness for responsive and build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstructions. Member states call for cross-sectoral, inclusive national and local disaster response, recovery and rehabilitation plan, promote development of national and regional multi-hazard early warning mechanisms, strengthen sub-regional, regional, and global cooperation, and mainstreaming DRR in the work of all relevant UN agencies, and in UN country analysis, planning, and programming documents. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, participants, it is clear that the political declaration represents a collective commitment to strengthen our resilience against disasters and address the interconnected challenges of climate change and disaster risk. The critical interlinkage between climate change and DRR was widely recognized in political declaration and throughout the process of negotiations. The impact of climate change as multiplier factors that increases the intensity and severity of disaster were emphasized by member states and reflected in the call to action under the four main priorities. Effective implementation of the Sendai framework and the political declaration will therefore be crucial to enhancing the capacity and resilience of states and communities in addressing climate change. The adoption of political declaration through consensus is also a testament that DRR and climate change action are every country's priority. In this regard, this political declaration and UNDRR midterm review reports provide a clear roadmap useful to member states, civil societies, the private sector, and UN system to accelerate the implementation of Sendai framework. So therefore, it is also crucial for us to input the midterm review of Sendai framework findings and political declaration into other intergovernmental outcomes of UN conferences and summits, particularly the upcoming SDG summits and Conference of the Party 28 of the UNFCCC, as well as Summit of the Future in 2024. I thank you for this opportunity and for your attention. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Such a really great overview. And I think you really demonstrated how the recommendations that have emerged from the midterm review of the Sendai framework are absolutely critical for the climate agenda, whether it's about enhancing risk understanding, more downscaled climate projections, nature-based solutions. You've really covered it all, so thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to the co-facilitator of the global Stocktake of the Paris Agreement, Mr. Farhan Akhtar, who's the chief scientist for climate change from the U.S. Department of State. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and welcome, or thank you for welcoming me here. I'm here on behalf of Harold Winkler, my other co-facilitator, and we've been running the technical dialogue of the first global stocktake for about a year now total, and we are wrapping up our third session tomorrow morning. And so please, I'll plug my event if that's okay. We'll have a plenary tomorrow morning, so please attend that. The mandate of the global stocktake from the Paris Agreement is quite clear. It does say that the outcomes of the global stocktake are to inform the enhancement of action and support on climate change, as well as international cooperation. And I think there's a lot of space underneath that broad outcome for a wide variety of links, and especially across the international cooperation front. I think a lot of what was been said so far this morning is relevant, highly relevant. And the global stocktake itself is, of course, a part of the overall Paris cycle, where it is supposed to be the ratchet mechanism that allows parties to come back with progressively more ambitious targets. And what Harold have I been doing, and as part of the technical dialogue process, has been trying to create an inclusive space where we do have perspectives on various issues coming in across the scope of the themes of the technical dialogue. And of course, as we've been taking this forward this last year, of course, it's happening in a time of unprecedented changes, and I think we've seen throughout the dialogues participants coming in with particular perspectives that are reflecting on the challenges they're facing in the world, and how they see this global stocktake helping them make progress soon. On the global stocktake, we do touch on almost every issue under the agreement. We have mitigation, response measures, adaptation, loss and damage, means of implementation and support across finance, technology, and capacity building, all as themes. Harold and I have also tried to organize more integrated discussions, looking at issues holistically. How do you implement actions that both achieve your mitigation as well as your adaptation goals? How do you support systemic transformations that can be very disruptive, yet have present a lot of opportunities for change? As been mentioned before, we're in our third dialogue of three, so we will be reflecting in a factual synthesis report, which is the mandate that's been given to us. By the end of the summer, we'll be presenting that to the parties and with emerging messages or key findings that we see having emerged from the dialogues that we've had over the last year. We've presented in March an initial draft of some emerging messages that we saw coming out of the technical dialogue, and have asked parties and non-party stakeholders to comment on those extensively this session. And we've gotten a lot of interesting and detailed feedback, and a lot of work for us to do over the summer. But those themes do hit on a lot of the things that are very relevant for this discussion. Locally led actions, focusing on transformations, integrated approaches, the need for scaled up support that's targeted to the most vulnerable, the importance of including the voices of the most vulnerable in policy outputs. All those things are captured there, and I would encourage you all to take a look at those, our summary report that we published last March that has a section that I think there'll be a lot of interesting information there for you. The other aspect of the global stocktake that's happened so far is an input collection phase, and the decision, the CMA decision that set up the global stocktake process has a list of inputs that is quite broad and captures a range of topics or a range of sources of information. So everything from party reporting to work with the constituted bodies, those are all going into a portal that we have, and I think we've counted the pages, or at least the machine has, and it's we're at 170,000 pages in that portal. So a wide range of information, a lot of details there, and I think important inputs from processes such as UNDRR and the Sendai framework that have come into that portal. There's been a lot of calls within the global stocktake process for a technical annex that could highlight specific actions that parties and non-party stakeholders could take as they reflect on the outcomes of the global stocktake. Harold and I are taking a look at that and trying to determine exactly how to develop that in the best way possible. But others have taken that, taken a different approach and have developed really a search interface that can look at that 170,000 pages of text and really return some specific input. So I would encourage you all to check out that website. It's gst1.org, one as a number.org. You can set up very detailed filters, and it's still in development. They're certainly seeking feedback, so please contribute to that. So as I said, we will be presenting a report later this year from the technical dialogue. I think a lot of the messages we're hearing today, and especially I think in the discussions, have been focused on how do we build synergies, how do we do a lot of things that we haven't done before in this process, and I think that's one of the responses that we could have to that is to say, well, there's other processes that have looked at similar issues, and they've developed methodologies and other areas of international cooperation that we could build from. So I think this is a ripe space for that, and I won't comment more on what the parties may do later this year, but I think it's certainly something that they should consider. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful overview that really walked us through a rather complicated process, but it's good to know there's a website that we can all dig into and understand better how this is going to play out. So thank you so much for that. We now move to the next part of our presentations this morning, in which we're really looking at two of the key aspects that have merged, both from the midterm review as well as the global stocktake, and relate very much to where we see synergies or areas of convergence, and that is around financing, but also local action. So I would now like to invite Jerry Velasquez, who is the Director, Division of Mitigation and Adaptation from the Green Climate Fund, to talk about how climate finance is keeping pace with growing climate and DRR needs, recognizing that, of course, climate change is driving up disaster risk because of extreme weather and increasing losses and damages. So how is climate finance keeping pace with this, and how do the GCF strategic priorities reflect this? Jerry, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First and foremost, although I'm from the GCF, I used to work for UNDRR, I have to say this, and I was part of the group that negotiated Sendai, and really very happy to be here back discussing Sendai framework. So I'll discuss two things. One is the link between climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and what are the new upcoming priorities of the GCF that is linked to locally led action. So most of us, we were here in Paris 2015, and we were all cheering when the Paris Agreement, first time, actually adopted, many things, many new innovations. Firstly, a comprehensive approach to risk, first time ever, the global goal on adaptation, and many things. We said at that time, finally, DRR is linked to climate. So we said that at that time. That was 8 years ago. But as we have now seen from the midterm review of the Sendai framework, although much progress has been achieved, a lot of work still needs to be done. And I think one of those work areas that we need to do is how do we link the work of disaster risk reduction to climate adaptation and climate finance. I think that's the key thing. Now, just to highlight 8 years on, what are the progress that we're doing in the GCF so that you can see that there's progress, but it took 8 years. It's the first time ever we're working now with the early warning for all, with all of the pillars of the early warning for all. First time, it's not yet there, but we're working towards it. We are working on the comprehensive school safety framework for the first time ever. We're developing a global program for this to support many countries on comprehensive school safety. We're working on comprehensive hospital safety and making that not just resilient, but low emission. Again, first time ever. So it is happening, but the question is, why did it take 8 years? Why did it take 8 years? We could have done it earlier. So I think one opportunity that we see is that there is a lot of good experience and lessons and things that we could accelerate from the DR community. And there needs to be a way that we bridge the gap between these two communities and accelerate action based on the already ongoing work. And the outcome should be increase and make climate finance access faster. That should be the goal. The goal should be make it more accessible and make it faster. And if we could find ways to scale up and to accelerate based on existing good work already in the DRR community. We should capitalize on that. I think that is one of the core messages. Now, how does this link to our next set of priorities? As you know, we are ending our first replenishment period this year. We work on 4-year periods, 2015 to 2019, and then 2020, 2023. We have programmed $12 billion, $45 billion total projects, 216 projects. We're entering our new replenishment period. And in 3 weeks' time, our board will adopt our next strategic plan. And in October, there will be pledges made, and then that would set now the tone for our next programming, 2024 to 2027. But what's already clear is the focus on adaptation. There are things that will not change. There are things that are being discussed by our board. What are the things that won't change? The focus on keeping 50% of our funding for adaptation will not change. We are probably one of those entities that actually focus a lot on adaptation. 50% of our funding on adaptation, 50% of our funding on grants. We're not a bank. We're an impact investor. We buy impact. We don't want our money back. So the other thing is that those things will not change. But what will change? The focus of our financing on adaptation. Our board is deliberating whether or not we should focus more on community-led action. There was discussion on community-led action. First time ever that there is, in fact, a target on community-led action. There is going to be a target on early warning for all. First time ever. For us to contribute on this UN-wide goal to actually make sure that every person on the planet have access to early warning systems. There's also going to be a target on innovation, not just high-tech innovation, but community, indigenous knowledge, and so on innovation. So there is a lot of that, but as you can see, the GCF has usually worked with governments, and at the national level, these are new areas for us. And to move into this area, to meet ambition, and probably to say that this is not unique to the GCF, this is everywhere. If you look at what's happening with the Multilateral Development Bank reforms, you will see that the focus is more towards focusing more on those people that are most affected by climate change. So the question is, how do we accelerate the work in this area, and how do we then meet the demand as set to us and guided by, in this case, our board? And I think going back to the first item that I mentioned, there is a lot of opportunity to go back to the original intent, the opportunity from the Paris Agreement. And that is the link between climate and disaster risk reduction. We should capitalize on that. And there is a lot of opportunities in working together. And I think this new strategy of the GCF actually provides us with that space to work together. And I think it's up to us to then find a way to actually make that more real and more concrete. So I do look forward to working with a lot of you in the coming 4 years in making sure that the new financing from the GCF are invested in the most appropriate and efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And really great news to know that the GCF will be investing at the community level, but of course also early warning, which we know is one of the most cost-effective ways of protecting people from disasters. So really good news from the GCF. I'd now like to turn to one of the leads of the Early Warning for All initiative from the fourth pillar. That's from the IFRC. Ms. Kirsten Hagen, who's the Senior Humanitarian Policy Advisor, speaking on behalf of Xavier Castellanos, who was ill and unable to attend today. We're working really all the time with the IFRC, every day practically, on various aspects of disaster risk reduction, also, as I just mentioned, early warning for all. It's always good to hear how the IFRC really sees the local level moving ahead and what opportunities you see to accelerate the work at the local level to build climate and disaster resilience in a coherent manner at the community level. So Kirsten, please, over to you.
Thanks so much, Laurie. And apologies from Javier. He actually got sick while on mission, so hasn't made it to Bonn at all. So hopefully I will do okay in his stead. So thank you very much for including IFRC. And for those who don't know, and the reason that Laurie is asking us about the local piece is that we are a network of 191 national societies, each working to support their governments to work with local communities, particularly around the area of disaster risk management. And as Mami noted, if you're doing disaster risk management, that is really starting more and more to be about managing the climate-related extreme weather events. And we actually look back in 2000s, in that decade, about 76% of disasters triggered by natural hazards were due to climate and weather-related hazards. The next decade, it was 83% or 86%, so 73% to 86%, and then last year it was 90% of those disasters were triggered by climate and weather-related events. So what our teams on the ground are dealing with is increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, as well as them affecting communities that have never been affected before. And that's particularly challenging because, of course, when you share an early warning message, big storm coming, you better get out. They're like, but every storm I've ever been in before, I was fine, so I'll probably be fine this time. And so trying to get through the message that it's not situation normal has been really challenging. So in terms of this distinction between climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, for the communities that we work with, this is completely irrelevant. What they care about is what is happening, how do we reduce the risks, how do we respond to it, do we have the different things that we need? I mean, so for example, we had Cyclone Freddy that hit Malawi in March this year, and we had over 500,000 people displaced. There were strong winds, there were floods, there were landslides. Over 500 camps were established for people who were evacuated, and hundreds died, while well over 2,000 were injured. Now, this was compounded by other problems, and this is something we're seeing repeatedly, is overlapping risks. We'll have a storm followed by another storm only a few weeks later in exactly the same location. And in this particular point, there was a cholera outbreak that was already ongoing. So you can imagine the risks of spreading cholera as people are moving into camp-like settings. And the Malawi Red Cross Society, working very closely with the government, was involved in anticipatory action, so early warning messages, they had pre-positioned stocks, they were responding with shelter, food, clean water, and so on. And when talking to the team on the ground and asking, how did this go? They're saying, well, one of the challenges is there were various stages of the response where we just didn't have enough investment. And the big piece they were saying is without the real investment in disaster risk reduction, in climate adaptation at the community level, they are having to respond to so much more in terms of losses and damages. And so while from a community perspective, the distinctions between development, humanitarian, climate are completely irrelevant, the consequences of our silos and the gaps in terms of where we are and are not able to act and where there hasn't been enough investment are really apparent. And when I ask the team, what are the gaps? They'll say, well, for example, we have early warning systems in this location, but it's only for this location and only for this particular type of hazard. We need those everywhere. In terms of the reconstruction and rehabilitation, the money stops once everybody has left the camps, and we can't help them build back better. We can't help them build their new homes. We can't help them build the new homes in a new location, and those homes that are built are not getting built back better because there's a lack of investment. So there's a lot of gaps, and we really need to be starting a much more coherent approach at the programmatic and implementation level. So there are a few positive developments, and the Director General from Indonesia mentioned governance as being a critical issue. So one of the pieces we've been seeing is that some of the governance structures and also some of the regulatory frameworks, the adaptation plans, are starting to become a lot more coherent and combined. So for example, Kiribati has a joint implementation plan on climate change adaptation and disaster risk management. In Fiji, there's a really interesting opportunity what's happening there. The government of Fiji, along with national and international disaster responders, so this is including the Fiji Red Cross, it's including IFRC, they're working together to review and integrate their disaster risk management laws to ensure that they are climate smart and responding to climate risks, and they're doing it in a consultative way with communities, so bringing on board the local communities. So some of the experiences that we've had in terms of the governments and looking at disaster law and climate law frameworks, adaptation plans, DRR strategies, I completely agree with what was said before about the need to bring those together at a local and national level. So in terms of some opportunities that we're also seeing at a regional level and at a global level, there are a couple of projects that are really quite exciting in terms of trying to break down these silos when it comes to implementation. So one really exciting initiative is this is actually being led by the Dutch, is a project called Water at the Heart. And they have brought together to deal with the fact that the problems with water is there's either too much water in terms of floods, too little water in terms of droughts, or it's too polluted water. And so how can we work together to address that across sort of DRR, climate adaptation, development, response, all of those communities together. And so this is a project where it has WMO with the data, UNDRR with their particular expertise, and then us as the IFRC working with national societies on the ground on the implementation piece, particularly focusing around implementing early warning systems. So there are some of these new Nexus projects that I think offer a lot of opportunities and are definitely worth looking at how we can scale them up. At the more policy level or the global level, we're also seeing some real opportunities. So we were really happy to see in the midterm review, the political declaration specifically promotes the development and investment in multi-hazard early warning mechanisms that lead to local action at local levels. And I just want to stress this, that you can have the greatest early warning system in terms of understanding the risks, communicating it, but if it doesn't actually resonate with people, if there's no response, if there's no investment in the action plans, then you're not actually going to save lives. And so this document actually reflects on that. And we're really hoping that we can bring some of that conclusions from the midterm review political declaration into the Sharm el-Sheikh outcomes document. So last year there was a mention of early warning for all, the importance of forecasting and observation, but it didn't talk about the early action. So I'm really hoping this year, with the increased recognition of the importance of community-based local action, we'll be able to get that. So just to close with a couple of thoughts in terms of how we can have a more coherent approach that really delivers for the people on the ground. I think the first thing is actually about making it people-centered. So we need to be thinking about what does this community need and how can we come together to address that need rather than what is my project on this issue, what is somebody else doing on another issue. We need to be working with local leadership, and we really need to be together working to find the gaps and to fill them so that we're really making sure that we're leaving no one behind. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. So this concludes the interventions from our panelists, and I think they've all very much made the case that extreme weather events are growing. It's having increasing impact at the local level. The midterm review of the Sendai framework, the global Stocktake on Paris Agreement really point to the need to accelerate action at multiple levels and greater investment in understanding risk, looking at our financing mechanisms, bringing in the private sector, greater investment in the public sector, investing in nature-based solutions and ecosystems DRR, as well as really ensuring early warning for all and investing in building back better. Of course, these are the priorities of the Sendai framework, but so applicable as well to the Paris Agreement achievement, and real opportunities exist to do this. We've had different examples that were given, and I think the examples that were given in the Pacific are always very, very practical because it's very much about taking an integrated approach. So how do we scale that up? How do we ensure that our programming and policy really reflects both DRR and climate action in a holistic and integrated manner? Thank you all to the panelists. We now have about 15 minutes, or a little bit less, for questions, answers, and comments from the floor. You are invited to stand up, and please introduce yourself, and then also let me know to whom you would like to direct your question or comment. And we have a colleague in the back. Is there a microphone? Okay, wonderful. So please, the floor is yours, and then we'll take
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Exley Taloiburi. I am from the Pacific, formerly team leader for climate change and resilience with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, based in Fiji, and currently working as expert for climate change and resilience with the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States in Brussels. At the moment, we are implementing an EDF, intra-ACP disaster risk reduction program together with UNDRR. It's a 100 million euro project for 79 countries in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific. I just wanted to share some observations on this issue. It's a very important issue that we are discussing today, synergizing DRR and climate change adaptation. I have a couple of points. One is that from our experience working in the Pacific, we do have a global first regional integrated framework on these two issues, known as the Framework for Resilient Development in the Pacific, 2017 to 2030. And that is supported by all stakeholder approach, which is known as the Pacific Resilience Partnership. Some of the key challenges that we face as we move forward with that work in the Pacific is the fact that the two separate global frameworks are not really helping with the way that they obligate countries to respond to specific requests. And so I see your comments around the opportunity with the global Stocktake and the recent midterm review for the Sendai framework as an important opportunity to bring those and show good practice from the global level so that regions can take that on board. Also, another challenge is how donors are able to align their support to the integrated framework at the regional level. We are still facing a lot of challenges with that. They are still aligning it in line with the separate frameworks at the global level. And I think there's an opportunity to move forward in an integrated approach. Secondly, the issue of political leadership is very critical. We cannot move forward with synergization if the two issues are not prioritized at the same level. At the political level, we see that climate change is always at the upper end of the political dialogue and agenda of politicians, and disaster risk reduction, a poorer cousin of climate change. And so we need that political will first. And I would like to share, I think, a good example from Africa, where they have the president of Mozambique as a champion for disaster risk management. And I think it's time that UNDRR and partners, you consider supporting other regions to replicate that kind of approach, because it's important. You need to bring it to the same level of prioritization before you can even talk about synergization. Thirdly, the work of central agencies is really important. We all know these issues are mainly driven by national disaster management offices, ministries of environment, but what is the role of ministries of finance, ministries of planning? Those are really important in terms of advancing the sustainability of such effort. And I would encourage that we move in that direction, we transform into that kind of arrangement when we engage at the regional and at the national level. The role of the private sector, before I sit down, is also very important. As other colleagues have mentioned, I think we need to ensure that private sector is taken more seriously. I think we always talk about this, but at the moment, most private sector stakeholders, they're investing their own resources to green their operations, to respond to disasters in an ad hoc manner. We need to be a bit more meaningfully engaging with them. What we have done in the Pacific in particular, we have facilitated processes where governments sign MOU on these particular issues with the private sector umbrella bodies such as the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have also done private sector mapping on resilience finance in most of our Pacific Island countries today. So those are some examples that I just want to share for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've done a beautiful job of summarizing some of the issues that keep emerging from our consultations and discussions with different regions who are also facing similar challenges with donors and having separate global frameworks that ends up perhaps dividing rather than bringing together. But your points are well taken. I would like to ask Ms. Mizutori if you would like to respond to the idea that DRR has been a little bit the slightly less sexy cousin for a long time, and we need to elevate it a bit.
I don't know, less sexy or poor, but it's true, right? When I took this job 5 years ago, actually there were a lot of people who had never heard of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and when I said I am working for, said, what? You know, I've never heard of you. And so, thank you very much. But the truth is, yes, I do feel that it has been a bit under the water. What really elevated the awareness to disaster risk reduction? Two things: climate emergency and, of course, the coronavirus. Because biological hazard is also part of the Sendai framework, and we solve the systemic risk cascading impact of disaster, devastating everybody. But again, the most at-risk people affected disproportionately. So now I think finally we know that we need to take these global agenda together, and hopefully with your support and your participation, the poorer cousin will become, not richer, but at an equal footing in the family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there was a woman here. Yes, would you like to go ahead? Yes,
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jamie Cummings, and I'm the climate change contact point with the stakeholder engagement mechanism, which is underneath the Sendai framework in partnership with UNDRR. And this question is for whoever would like to answer it. But we're talking about how we're trying to elevate DRR in the climate action space. And I think that one avenue recently has been loss and damage. We heard a lot from the panel today about adaptation, but I'd love to hear more about how you see it connected to loss and damage and that negotiation point as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for an excellent question. Who would like to take that? Kirsten. Paul, okay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think that that's a very important question, and it relates directly to what is going on in the corridors. DRR is obviously an important piece of addressing, minimizing, and averting loss and damage. So in that sense, I think it's a critical piece, and I think it occupies perhaps a big percentage of what countries are doing and will need to be doing to address loss and damage. And UNDRR is very much a key contributor to those discussions, I can assure you of that, either through the Santiago network as well as the discussions in the Glasgow dialogue that just concluded on Saturdays. So we look forward, I think, to improving and expanding that synergy between what UNDRR does and what parties will agree to do in the new fund and funding arrangements for loss and damage. Thanks.
Thank you. And if you allow me 1 minute, I maybe would just like to answer that question as well by stating that I think it was last year we carried out a survey with countries to understand what were they looking for in terms of technical support on loss and damage. And we found that it very much mirrored the type of work that's already being done. More support for data, better assessments, better analysis, early warning systems. So there's a lot of convergence between these areas of work. Hence, we think it's much more important to bring them together than to try to find what separates them. And that's where we really feel we'll have a much greater impact at the country level. It's really trying to look at this holistically and to draw from the many years of experience that we've had and our partners have had in helping countries really avert, minimize, and address losses and damages from disaster events. Thank you. As well as from slow onset processes, which are increasingly linked, I might add. So thank you for that. There was a gentleman who also had a question. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Ram. I work in coastal and marine engineering and management, so I work with many coastal communities. And my question is to Mr. Jerry. He talked about the new approach of locally led adaptation. Does that mean for the second replenishment of the GCF, you will expand the framework of the direct access entities to allow local institutions that are not nominated by governments to access these funds, especially for countries that are far from the eye, let's say, where like the federal government or like central governments don't have a very strong role into developing coastal regions. So like this duty is actually local for is the duty of the local communities, local governments. So is there a way to expand the direct access entity framework, or are you planning to create a new pathway for these institutions or these organizations to access the fund of the GCF? Thank you.
Many thanks for the question. As part of easing access, one thing that we're doing at the moment is we're providing now an opportunity for non-accredited entities to be able to access finance from the GCF for one single project. It's called project-specific accreditation approach. So you get accredited not for the whole period, but for one project. So you submit an application, and in your application, you also get assessed as an institution. So we've opened it from this March. We have, from guidance of our board, is to do this 10 projects per year for the next 3 years. And we do have a few already submitted. We welcome submissions at this stage. And we look forward to, in fact, we need to make sure that this balance, including from local actors. So this is one. The second thing is that we have had a program called Enhanced Direct Access Modality. It's a request for proposal wherein we created a $200 million window with the GCF. And it is entirely for our direct access entities to provide on-granting to communities. However, the uptake was so small, which is surprising, because those that are willing are not able, and those that are able are not willing. What does that mean? It means that those entities that are capable of on-granting do not want this kind of project. And those that want this kind of project do not have the accreditation to do on-granting, because they need to on-grant cash, and that's a unique ability. Some of our entities can only do management of projects. So now, under our new strategic plan, we are going to open it also to international entities, to allow for any other entities. So, for example, we've had partners like Save the Children, who had the largest community-based adaptation project in the world in Vanuatu. So, obviously, we are still going to target direct access entities and partners who would like to submit for the project-specific accreditation. But to scale up action, we're also going to open it to international partners.
Thank you, Jerry, for that answer. We have time for one more question. I'm not sure who it was. Please, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Saskia Burners. I work with United Nations University here in Bonn. And more recent, I've been intrigued by recovery, and really in the sense of building back better. With increasing extremes, I fear more and more communities have to recover or are even in a sort of a constant state of recovery. And I also feel it could be the linking pin between DRR, adaptation, and loss and damage. So my question to the panel is, how do you see recovery? But maybe more important with this link to the midterm review, what were the results on recovery from the midterm review, and where do we take it? And I know you've been touching upon it a little bit, but I would really like to hear with this focus. Maybe also because to some extent I feel recovery is sort of the adaptation in the convention. It's the sort of the thing that is maybe necessary, but we would prefer something else. But I feel it's so important from what we see, and also I see so little evidence of really recovery in the sense of building back better. So I was wondering about your experiences there.
Thank you. That's really an excellent question, the importance of resilient recovery, and how does it feature in what we're discussing. May I ask any of the panelists if they would like to talk about Mami, and then perhaps other colleagues as well. Thank you.
Just to say that you hit the, nail on the head, because a major finding of the midterm review process was that we see very little or no evidence of building back better. Although it is a really important opportunity to build resilience. And there may be many reasons behind this. It is not easy to build back better. We know that it is not only a technical issue, but many times it's a political issue. And the investment into it is not happening. So this is one of the major issues that we need to tackle. There is a platform called the International Recovery Platform, which was formed even before the Sendai framework. And our plan, when I say our, it means the Secretariat of the IRP, is to look into this issue and understand what are the challenges, and also help governments not to lose this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And Jerry would also like to say a few words, and then we will have to wrap it up and give it to our last speaker. So please.
Maybe just to add in the context of the ongoing recovery from the pandemic, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and all of these other multiple pressures that are felt by small states and small countries. The challenge for them is that they have limited options to actually work because they have to firstly provide for their communities. So we have seen small states discussing things like how can they promote conservation of their oceans when they have to promote fisheries because their communities have to recover from all of this. So therefore, coming up with options for them, a combination of sustainable use in addition to conservation is key. And in this context, I think it's up to us in the community on adaptation to actually look for these business models. Because if we do not give them the option, then they would go to things like, deep sea mining and dredging and so on, because they do have to also provide for their communities. So I think it's not a question of this or that. We just need to provide these options. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for a really important question. It's my pleasure to now ask Ms. Sophie Rigg, who's the board member of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction, that's the GNDR, and co-director of the Climate Action Network UK, to give some closing reflections from the civil society perspective. We have been talking about very much from the perspective of global frameworks, but now really from the perspective of civil society. Your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Laurie. So those that don't know, GNDR, we're the largest global network of civil society organisations working on disaster risk reduction. And it's obviously not easy going after such an expert panel and such an insightful discussion, but I'll do my best to pull out some key points and offer some reflections. But first, I think it would be amiss of me to not comment briefly on the context that we find ourselves in. As we launch into the second week of SB 58 and into what is the final days, we all sit here acutely aware of the severity of climate change and the precarity of our situation and the challenges that we face today. We know the urgent need for political leadership and we know what the ambitious and inclusive solutions look like. And we know, as highlighted by our panel, that this requires working across sectors and adopting a whole of society approach with strong local voice and stakeholder engagement. And as such, as we enter the final days of SB 58, I think it's quite clear that we need collaborative governance and to ensure that our individual actions and priorities and positions are defined not by division, but by our shared humanity and common goals. So with this as our backdrop, I'll just turn to some of the key themes raised by the panel. So a first theme that was discussed was around how the findings of the midterm review of the Sendai framework can be leveraged into the global stocktake. And as discussed, the midterm review really stressed just how far behind we are on building resilience to disasters and climate change. And these gaps in progress and our failings must really be very well reflected in the global stocktake. But then building on these gaps and lessons, as the political declaration of the midterm review has done, and how these discussions have also pointed to, the GST can then also help to break down the silos across development, disaster risk reduction, and climate change adaptation, and the associated policies and practices of these spheres. Those on the front lines, as was also raised, do not distinguish between these sector divides. And looking ahead, the global stocktake really needs to champion holistic and integrated approaches to building climate resilience, as also highlighted by our keynote speaker. The global stocktake is clearly an opportunity to course correct and to usher in a new era of strong coherence and coordination across sectors, as well as comprehensive and collaborative governance on risk. And it's an opportunity that we must seize or ignore at our own peril. I think a second question that's been addressed by the panel was around the enabling factors for integrating disaster risk reduction and climate change action. And here we've heard how a whole of society approach is needed, and one that recognizes local leadership in all its diversity, and that creates space for local agency and in the building of climate resilience. And then last, but by no means least, a third theme addressed by the panel has been on the role that donors and financial institutions can play. Donors and financial institutions really need to provide reliable, flexible, coordinated, and long-term funding. And this funding needs to be delivered rapidly and to reach and be accessible to organizations at the local level. These organizations are the ones that are on the front lines of climate impacts, and they're often leading the way in building climate resilience. This funding also needs to be in the form of grants, and it must meet, or at least a substantial portion needs to be in the form of grants, and it must meet the scale of disaster risk reduction, adaptation, and loss and damage needs. Loans and empty promises will only perpetuate the deadlocks of vulnerability and the suffocating debt that we see today. They'll also only undermine the trust that we have in each other and the trust that we have in the global institutions that we rely on. So I'll leave my remarks there and hand back to you, Laurie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you did an excellent summary of the panel discussion, and it's now time to conclude today's session. I would really like to thank all of our distinguished panelists. You really brought to the forefront, I think, some critical issues for the deliberations this week, but also carrying us to the future COP that will be taking place, where we really hope to see the results of the midterm review of the Sendai framework and our ongoing work to build resilience to disaster risks reflected. So thank you all very much, and thank you all to our audience as well. Yeah? Oh, a group picture? Okay, wow. Okay, group picture. Okay. Ready? How do you want to do that?
Let's take a
You have been tweeted. No, you have retweeted yours. Recognition. Thank you very much. Yes.